Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the latest edition of Texas RE's Reliability 101 and 201 series. Today, we've got a Reliability 201 titled The CMEP Feedback Loop with one of our enforcement attorneys, Miss Ashley Wanema. Before we get started, we've got just a few things to go over. First, as always, which you can see up on your screen right now, is our antitrust admonition. I will spare you listening to me read the entire thing, but remind you that if you have any questions, to please contact our general counsel. This is it, folks. The final stretch, the last week. We've got CMEP feedback loop today, and then tomorrow we've got our two final sessions. In the morning, we'll be doing a compliance in a line walkthrough, and then in the afternoon at our usual time, we'll have Reliability 201 on reliability services. And then on the 26th and 27th, we've got talks with Texas RE featuring guest speakers. 26th is going to be on EPA power sector regulations. And then on the 27th, we have a special session with David Batts. And that session is not going to be recorded. So do be sure, if you're interested in that, joining us for it, because a recording will not be posted. Then, after those sessions, we've got a couple more talks with Texas RE in July before we get to our big cyber and physical security workshop on August 28th. I would like to remind folks that this is a hybrid event, both in-person and virtual, and that in-person registration space is limited. So be sure to get signed up early if you are interested in coming down to visit. But what is not limited is the outreach available throughout the ERO enterprise. As you can see here, our colleagues in the other parts of the country have events of their own. NERC is still hosting their GADS wind and solar template and application training, and that's going to run through the end of July. Simultaneous to that, MRO has their regional summer assessment webinar on June 27th. On July 16th through 18th, CERC is hosting their physical security workshop. And then on August 13th through the 15th, WEC is hosting their own power system security conference. As I mentioned to those of you who got here early, we will be using Slido as usual. If you have any questions during today's presentation, that's the place to put them. To get to Slido, go to sli.do or slido.com and use the participant code TXRE. Or you can skip all of that and scan the QR code in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. While y'all are getting logged into Slido, I will finally stop talking and turn it over to Miss Ashley Wanema. Ashley, take it away.
So, hi everyone. My name is Ashley Wanema, as that introduced me, and today I will be talking to you all about the CMEP feedback loop. So, a little bit about me. I'm an enforcement attorney in the enforcement department at Texas RE, and prior to working here, I worked as an attorney with the Public Utility Commission of Texas, with the Texas Water Development Board, some law firms doing construction litigation, and also a battery generator owner. So, what is the CMEP feedback loop and what do we mean by that? So those are all questions I will get into shortly. But as an entity, you may have been wondering what Texas RE actually does with all the information requested from entities, like the myriad of questionnaires that we send out about entity structure and ownership, or why we do an inherent risk assessment, or why are there so many different contacts in different departments, and why are there different departments? So a little bit about background about Texas RE and all of that. I would encourage all of you to check out our previous Reliability 101 and 201 series. But first, in order to tell you what the CMEP feedback loop means, I have to tell you what CMEP means. So CMEP, as you can see here, is just an acronym for the Compliance, Monitoring, and Enforcement Program. So CMEP and that program really goes to the heart and mission of why Texas RE is here, why FERC is here, why NERC is here, why there is this entire framework. So the Compliance Monitoring Enforcement Program, or CMEP, is the program that is focused on identifying, prioritizing, and addressing risk to the bulk power system, or BPS for short. So our mission, Texas RE's mission, is to assure the effective and efficient reduction of risk to the reliability and security of the electric grid within the Texas interconnection. To ensure that we are reducing those risks to the BPS, we take a risk-based approach to running the CMEP. Next slide, please. So that leads me to the CMEP feedback loop. So as you can see here, there's a diagram of four main parts of a cycle and also kind of a different like little flow chart. And the CMEP feedback loop refers to the life cycle of compliance monitoring and enforcement of entities. So there are four main parts of that cycle. So first, there's registration and certification. Second, comes risk and risk assessment. Third comes compliance monitoring. And fourth, possibly, comes enforcement. So an entity's first interaction with Texas RE is through that first kind of part with registration and certification in the middle, and then it loops back to risk, then to compliance monitoring for entities, then possibly to enforcement, and then loops all the way back around to continue the cycle. So information learned through one part of the cycle informs how all the other parts will be undertaken. Next slide, please. So first, kind of wanted to give you a little bit of background on those four parts of the cycle. We'll move in deeper on each part and how all four parts use all of the information provided by entities to move throughout the cycle. So first up, we have registration and certification. And you can kind of think of this as the on-ramp for an entity onto the cycle. So why do I say on-ramp? It's because registration and certification serves as the entity's first interaction with Texas RE, as all entities are required to register. And for that certification piece, what that means is that when entities are registering for the first time, there are certain functions within the BPS that require certification. And those are reliability coordinator or RC, balancing authority or BA, or transmission operator or TO. And they must also complete that certification process before being officially registered. So the purpose of registration and certification is to, one, clearly identify and register bulk power system users, owners, operators who are responsible for performing specified reliability functions, and two, to ensure that all those entities that are in the system have everything they need, all the tools, the processes, the training and procedures to meet the requirements and the reliability standards. So wanting to point out here, just the key deliverables or inputs that registration and certification puts onto that cycle in that process. So during registration and certification, that department will collect information about the entity's profile, about the entity's facilities, capabilities, internal controls, their internal control compliance program and culture, and just any information about changes. Maybe there was a change to the joint registration, or maybe an entity even added on a new function. So if you want to hear further about that, we have a Reliability 101 series on registration and certification. Next slide, please. So moving on to the second part of that loop. So from registration and certification, we went to risk assessment. And you can think of this second part of being really the heart of the feedback loop. So I'll just emphasize again that Texas RE takes a risk-based approach to compliance. And what do I mean by risk-based? Risk-based means that we don't treat all entities that are fulfilling all the functions in the BPS the same, right? We treat them differently according to the kind of risk that they pose to the entire system. So risk assessment will develop a focused compliance approach by carefully considering each risk that each entity poses. So here, just wanting to point out that key deliverables or inputs from risk onto the cycle would be the inherent risk assessment, or the IRA. And in that inherent risk assessment, we look at 18 inherent risk areas. So those are things like how many generation and transmission assets does an entity own, or what operational responsibilities there are. And then we assess that registered entity by giving them a score of either high, medium, or low in those 18 areas. And then another key deliverable or input that risk assessment kind of puts onto the cycle would be the internal control evaluation, and then the compliance oversight plan that combines all of those different performance risk, inherent risk into one kind of strategic plan that we have for entities here at Texas RE. And for further information on that, you can listen to our Risk 101 recording. So next slide, please. So moving on to the third phase of the cycle would be compliance monitoring. So compliance monitoring takes everything that they learned from risk, and it really refers to the process that here at Texas RE that we use to assess, investigate, evaluate, and audit an entity in order to measure compliance with the NERC reliability standards and the requirements. So we might use several different methods, as you can see listed here, to carry out those compliance functions. So we might use compliance audits, which could be both scheduled or unscheduled. We might use spot checks, compliance investigations, data request forms, self-certifications. There are a variety of methods that we use to kind of measure compliance and make sure that entities are sticking on track. So key deliverables are inputs that compliance monitoring kind of develops and puts onto the cycle for the next part of the phase to use would be just those recommendations that they have from the compliance methods and monitorings above. So recommendations for the entity, maybe we are suggesting that they should take a different approach with their internal compliance program. We might identify areas of concern in the compliance program. We will also identify any positive observations that we have that we see with the entity's compliance. And then we will possibly identify any potential non-compliances or PNCs that the entity had during an engagement. So next, slide please. So next would be enforcement. And that's the department I'm in, and that is the fourth and last part of the loop with enforcement. And don't worry, we're not as scary as we seem. We're really here to just make sure that entities get back on track and make sure that proper mitigation for a violation occurs. So enforcement refers to the process used to issue possible sanctions for confirmed violations, and then, as I stated, to ensure mitigation of confirmed violations of the mandatory NERC reliability standards. So if an entity is found in violation of a standard, they must submit a mitigation plan or activities, and once that plan or activities are approved, they must execute the plan as submitted. So here I just kind of want to point out that key deliverables that enforcement kind of puts back onto the cycle for all the other parts to see would be the disposition of the violation. And what do I mean by the disposition of a violation? That kind of just refers to the severity level of a violation. So there are a violation or potential non-compliance could possibly be dismissed. We could give it a compliance exception or CE treatment. It could fall into the category of a find, fix, and track report, or it could rise to a more serious violation. So a spreadsheet notice of penalty or SNOP, or a notice of penalty or NOP. And for further information on that, we have an Enforcement 101 series if you want to get into all the granularities, but that just kind of sums up what is a disposition. Next slide, please. So now we can kind of see that we have 4 parts of the cycle, and we're going to put it all together. So as I stated, the CMEP feedback loop puts all those disparate pieces into one cohesive cycle. And we take into account everything we've learned, all the information that entities have provided to us, and put it together. So entities are not really operating in a vacuum. When you speak with one department at Texas RE, rest assured that that information is trickling down. So in looking at the on-ramp of the cycle, registration to risk, where entities register and certify registration, the risk assessment group takes those inputs from registration and they spit out the compliance oversight plan, the internal controls evaluation, and we also collect entity responses to the IRA questionnaire. So at registration's inputs, risk is able to refine the questions asked to the entity so we can kind of get an accurate picture concerning risk. So I know the questionnaire kind of seems tedious, but all of that information is needed to make sure that we are properly assessing risk and properly making sure that the BPS is running smoothly. So we get information about the compliance and event history. So just kind of what violations have occurred, how long ago, the root cause, the mitigation, the compliance program and culture of an entity, the workforce capability and experience that is seen within the entity structural organization, what control facilities and external electronic communications that the entity kind of undertakes, what joint registrations, mapping and interconnections to make sure that all areas in the Texas interconnection are served equally. So when you think about registration to risk, I'm kind of go with a hypo. So we can think about a hypothetical entity that is onboarding onto the cycle through registration and certification. So, for example, we might think about entity ABC. And if you listen to the Risk 101 presentation, you'll be picking up on that example. But entity ABC, so let's say they are a generator owner and operator or a GO and GOP. And the risk assessment group will take in all of those inputs from the questionnaire and from registration, and they'll spit out and state that maybe the risk identified with entity ABC, maybe we'll put them in a category 5. So that will mean that it has a lower inherent risk compared to like a category 1 or a 2 entity. So entity ABC, maybe they're a really small facility. They have demonstrated positive performance because they've had no events in the last 5 years. They've only had one audit, but didn't have any findings that came as a result of that audit, and had 2 misoperations in the last 3 years, but took care of them. And let's say we have another entity that is also onboarding from registration, and we'll call them entity XYZ. So entity XYZ fulfills the functions, let's say, of a distribution provider, a transmission owner and operator, and a transmission planner. And risk assessment will look at all those inputs from registration, and maybe they'll classify them as a category 1 risk. So keeping in mind that every transmission owner operator is already going to be a category 1 or 2. But maybe this particular entity, XYZ, is moved up into category 1 because they had 3 audits with multiple repeated violations, and they have a moderate risk, an above average misoperation rate, and maybe their compliance program is kind of weak and they have weak internal controls. So moving on to the next slide. So here we think about those inputs that come from risk. So the COP, the IRA, or inherent risk assessment. And we think about how compliance uses that. So compliance takes all of that information at risk and actually works together with risk in an extremely collaborative process to put together what is a compliance engagement. So we covered all of the tools that might be used in a compliance engagement. So it could be an audit, could be a self-certification, could be a spot check. So compliance and risk together collaboratively takes all that information and shapes every single part of the compliance engagement. So they use it to determine the type of engagement. They use it to schedule engagements, to decide the time frame between engagements. We use it to determine the scope of an engagement. So risk will look at all of those risk factors and the COP and kind of provide a sort of menu of which NERC reliability standards are directly implicated from those certain risk factors. So just so you know, the COP doesn't provide every single reliability standard that it is enforceable against an entity, but just kind of the most pertinent to the risk factors. So if you're ever curious about getting a complete list of what applicable standards an entity is required to implement, you can always go to the NERC website and find the functional applicability spreadsheet. So taking those 2 previous hypothetical entities that I mentioned, so entity ABC, the generator owner and generator operator, compliance might decide to just do an off-site compliance audit every 6 years and maybe just do self-certifications for other reliability standards because looking at the risk factors, we've assigned them a lower category of risk, and entity ABC had more of a positive compliance culture and compliance controls. But maybe with entity XYZ, so that was that distribution provider, transmission owner, operator, and transmission planner, compliance might decide to do an on-site compliance audit. In contrast to the 6 years with entity ABC, they might decide to do one every 2 years, and it's on-site versus off-site, just because of the weak internal controls and the compliance culture, and then the multiple repeated violations that entity XYZ had. Next slide, please. So next, we can kind of think about how enforcement uses all those that information from phases 2 and 3 of the cycle, so from risk and compliance. So the compliance engagement team, so from the engagement, so the audit or the spot check or certification, they'll present all of their findings to Texas RE management and kind of finalize what classification they're giving. So enforcement will take in any not potential non-compliances that came as a result of that audit or spot check or whatever compliance monitoring method was used. And we will directly review the potential non-compliance or PNC to see what kind of disposition we will assign to it. So we might be thinking, as I mentioned before, maybe we dismiss it. Maybe it wasn't actually a violation when we dug in deeper to the reliability standards. Maybe the kind of start date of the reliability standard didn't match up with the violation. And or maybe we decide if it's going to get CE, FFT, or more serious treatment with penalties. So enforcement, when we review a potential noncompliance, I know for me and for everyone in enforcement, we look back at the engagement findings that compliance put out. So I will look at the RSAWs, the presentation, the correspondence that happened, the audit worksheets, and kind of get a picture of what happened during that engagement and use that to kind of help inform what severity of or what level of severity that we will assign to the noncompliance. Or maybe there's more information that's needed that wasn't obtained during the compliance audit. So maybe we'll send out RFIs or requests for information. Or maybe I need to ask more about the scope and extent of the noncompliance, whether there was an extent of condition review done, or maybe the root cause wasn't as clear or doesn't quite make sense with all the information present. So we use all of that information in enforcement to ensure mitigation and appropriate disposition processing with NERC and FERC. And then we will always want to make sure that the entity has some sort of measure in place, some sort of preventive or detective control to prevent that noncompliance and any others from occurring in the future. So in thinking about what risk kind of puts onto the cycle and how enforcement uses that, enforcement makes sure that they review the entity's entire profile. So that means the compliance oversight plan and the IRA. So we want to see what's going on with their internal compliance program, what risk factors there are, how serious was this violation to the BPS. And that kind of determines the level of severity as well. So we review all those risk categories and factors identified, and that is a direct input into the severity of the risk of the noncompliance, even if there wasn't an actual impact on the bulk power system. So we're going to look at the compliance history, how big the entity is, and use all of that to determine. So in thinking about those two previous hypothetical entities that I mentioned, entity ABC, that GOP, we might decide to just give it compliance exception treatment to a violation because they have a strong compliance culture that caught the noncompliance, and entity ABC quickly mitigated that noncompliance. So that's pretty pivotal to what treatment that we're going to give it in enforcement. And maybe they didn't have any other violations of the standard, or maybe if they did even have violations for that same standard, maybe we still decide on CE treatment because the root cause was different. So with entity XYZ, so that DP, TO, TOP, TP, maybe we decide on a SNOP or even a full-blown NOP, so notice of penalty with financial penalties because they had multiple repeated violations. This is quite a large entity. that will, if they have more repeated violations of the standards and there is an actual impact to the BPS, the impact could be catastrophic. Maybe the compliance culture is weak. The violation was only caught in one of the audits that compliance is doing and not because of any preventative controls that the entity put in place. So, well, that's the way we kind of look at that and take that information in from risk and compliance. Next slide, please. So, bringing it all together. So, as we learned before, risk is really the heart of the feedback loop and is pivotal in using a risk based approach to everything we do here at Texas RE. So, kind of all the information learned from enforcement, compliance, registration, all leads back to the risk assessment group and really closes that CMEP feedback loop. So, from compliance, risk assessment will take all the information that was evaluated during a compliance engagement and decide whether the COP and IRA needs to be updated. And also, after the engagement, compliance and risk work collaboratively to review any lessons learned or any information that was obtained during a compliance engagement that could cause a change to the IRA or COP. And so there's a lot of open lines of communication between those two departments in particular. So that really kind of closes the loop. But from enforcement, risk assessment might take enforcement actions and update the compliance history component of the IRA and COP. And this also might affect what category an entity falls in. So maybe entity XYZ gets bumped up, although they're already a category 1, or maybe entity ABC gets bumped down to like category 6. Maybe they were a 5 before, just because of the positive compliance culture. So risk will periodically create new COPs and IRAs, and new ones can be triggered by those specific occurrences in other parts of the cycle. So that really closes the CMEP feedback loop and the cycle continues. Any questions?
Great. Thank you so much, Ashley. Folks, if you have any questions, don't be shy. While we're giving folks a chance to get those in, I would like to reiterate something that I'd mentioned earlier. I had another number of folks reach out to me, their ears perked up when I said will not be recorded. That is in reference to our talk with Texas RE on the 27th. So that is going to be on Thursday. And it is also going to be at 10 a.m. instead of our usual 1:30 p.m. So we're doing everything we can to confuse you guys. I apologize about that. At 10 a.m., we're going to have David Batts, who's the Managing Director of Cyber and Infrastructure Security at Edison Electric Institute. And that's going to be on part of our Talk with Texas RE supply chain series. So be sure to join us for that and take diligent notes because, again, it will not be recorded. Ashley, we still don't have any questions. Do you have any closing comments you'd like to make while we give folks one last opportunity to get those in?
Well, thank you everyone for listening. And if you ever have any questions for me for enforcement, we have a general email that is, I believe, enforcement@texasre.org. You can always reach out with any questions. So any questions about even compliance engagements, any questions about risk assessment, how those are done, always feel free to reach out to us. If you feel that you might have a PNC that you want to self-report, reach out to us. We're very happy to kind of talk you through that. And yeah, we're just here. We're here as a resource.
Very well said, Ashley. We are indeed here, and we will continue to be here. So, folks, we have a great day, and we hope that we'll see you tomorrow.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.